Let me give you some of the headlines, and these are headlines from today. New York City schools encourage kids now to stop using the words mom and dad because they're offensive. California is embracing mandatory racial injustice study for all of its 1.7 million high schoolers. The law school of Ohio, the Ohio Law School, has chastised their students for being too white after the release of a study ranking the whitest law schools in America. Okay, I don't think it's the...
This is a good practice, by the way. We should be ranking by skin color.
Right.
That's a good thing for the country to get going again.
Can you imagine if this was done in the 1960s or... Well, it was. If this is what was proposed in the 70s, that we start grading everything by how white it or how black it is, and we say, if it's black, it's no good. Can you imagine that?
That is what they're doing. They're saying it's a bad school if it's white. If it's white. This is terrible. Okay. And I thought something we left behind a long time ago.
Well, we didn't. And everybody is positioning themselves. Yesterday, I told you, well, let's go with Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss, what happened there? The family decided, the estate decided. Now, have you ever seen like the Ford Foundation? Ford Foundation can, any of these big funds, they usually go off the rails because the original intent is no longer there. I don't know if this is the case with Dr. Seuss or not, but it's usually a committee or generations past that don't really have the original intent at heart. You're seeing this now with businesses that are also coming out. Yesterday, what was the story yesterday, Stu, where they came out and they said, Dove and Unilever, they're removing the word normal off of their shampoo when it's marked for normal or dry hair. Now it's just going to be marked for dry hair. So what
dry or damaged, which is worse.
So why do what shampoo do I use? Because I have like normal hair. I don't have any real problems with the hair other than it's falling out. Should I use Gorilla Glue? What do I do? The reason why Unilever did that is because they are preparing now for what are called ESGs, environmental, social justice, and governance scores. So if you are not in line with one of those, you're going to get a lower score. So all of these giant corporations are rushing to show how woke they are because they need a high score in the S. Otherwise, they're going to be deemed a risk to the financial system. If you want to learn more about it, you can just watch my shows on Wednesday. Go back and watch the last 3 weeks of shows. Starting, 3 weeks ago. Just watch those shows and you'll get an idea of what ESG is and the Great Reset. It's really important because that's why everybody is starting to make these moves. And they're not going to reverse it unless you stand up because they know what's coming. You just don't. UPenn nursing final exam mandates students ask imaginary patient for preferred pronouns. Transgender author has been nominated for the UK Women's Fiction Award. The transgender author nominated for a woman's award. I don't know why women aren't upset at this. I don't know. I mean, you're taking sports away from them. Now, women's author, I guess you could make the case that, men and women. No, you can't even make the case because everybody says they think differently, yet they're exactly the same. So if a man competes in a female category, they're not the same. Why should they be eligible for that? Because they took hormones and changed their parts? That doesn't change the chromosome. That doesn't change. Why are we doing this to women? Anyway, the next one is the Texas school district apologizes to parents for the assignment of books with graphic sex scenes in them. It's it's worse and worse. Now, I want to show you, you're not alone. If you say transgendered athletes should not compete in women's sports, you are not the fringe. You are in the vast majority. If you think that transgender athletes should compete in women's sports, you're on the fringe. And yet that very small group is herding all of us into a place that none of us want to go. How are they getting away with it? Because they've convinced you, A, that you don't matter, and they've convinced you to be afraid. Let me give you this story from Barry Weiss. Now, she was formerly with the New York Times. She left the New York Times in a very vocal way. She is not a conservative, and she spoke out and said, this cancel culture and political correctness is insane and going to kill us. She's just put out a new article, The Miseducation of America's Elites, that you need to read. She said the dissidents use pseudonyms and turn off their videos when they meet for clandestine Zoom calls. They're usually coordinating soccer practices in carpools, but now they've come together to strategize. They say they could face profound repercussions if anyone knew they were even talking. But the situation of late has become too egregious for emails or complaining on conference calls. So one recent weekend on a leafy street in West Los Angeles, they gathered in person and invited me to join. In the backyard behind a 4-bedroom home, 10 people sat in a circle of plastic Adirondack chairs, eating bags of Skinny Pop. These are the rebels. Well-off Los Angeles parents who send their children to Harvard Westlake, the most prestigious private school in the city. By normal American standards, they are quite wealthy. But by the standards of Harvard Westlake, they're average. These are two career couples who credit their own success not to family connections or inherited wealth, but to their own education. So it strikes them as something more than ironic that a school that costs more than $40,000 a year, a school with Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's right hand, and Sarah Murdoch, wife of Lachlan, Rupert Murdoch's daughter-in-law, is on its board, and they're teaching students that capitalism is evil. For most parents, the demonization of capitalism is the least of it. They say their children tell them they're afraid to speak up in class. Most of all, they worry about the school's new plan to become an anti-racist institution, unveiled this July. It's making the kids fixate on race and attach importance to it in ways that strike them as grotesque. Quote, I grew up in L.A., and the Harvard school definitely struggled with diversity issues. The stories have expressed since the summer seem totally legitimate, says one of the fathers. He says he doesn't have a problem with the school making greater efforts to redress past wrongs, including by bringing more minority voices into the curriculum. What he has a problem with is this movement that tells his children that America is a bad country and that they bear collective racial guilt. They're making my son, quoting, feel like a racist because of the pigmentation of his skin, one mother says. Another poses a question to the group. How does focusing a spotlight on race fix how kids talk to one another? Why can't they all just be Wolverines? That's Westlake. This Harvard Westlake Parents Group is one of the many organizing quietly around the country. Let me say it again. This parents group is one of many organizing quietly around the country to fight what it describes as an ideological movement that has taken over their schools. This story is based on interviews with more than 24 of these dissenters, teachers, parents, and children at an elite prep school, 2 of the bluest states in the country, New York and California. The parents in the backyard say that for every one of them, there are many more too afraid to speak up. I've talked to at least 5 other couples who say, I get it. I think the way you do. I just won't want the controversy right now, related one mother. They're all eager for their story to be told, but not a single one would let me use their name. They worry about losing their jobs or hurting their children if their opposition to this ideology were known. The school can ask you to leave for any reason, said one mother. Then you'll be blacklisted from all the private schools and you'll be known as a racist, which is worse than now being called a murderer. That's a mother in Brentwood. Isn't that interesting? One private school parent born in a communist nation told me, I came to this country escaping the very same fear of retaliation that now my own child feels. Another joke, we need to feed our families. Oh, and pay $50,000 a year to have our children get indoctrinated. A teacher in New York City put it most concisely. To speak against this is to put all of your moral capital at risk. Parents who have spoken out against this ideology, even in private ways, says it hasn't gone over well. I had a conversation with a friend and asked him, is there anything about this movement we should question? A father with children in 2 prep schools in Manhattan. He said, dude, that's dangerous ground you're on in our friendship. I've had enough of those conversations to know that's what happens. That fear is shared deeply by the children. For them, it's not just the fear of getting a bad grade or getting turned down for a college recommendation, though that fear is potent. The fear of social shaming. If you publish my name, it will ruin my life. People would attack me for even questioning this ideology. I don't want people knowing that I'm a capitalist, a student at Fieldstone School in New York City told me, in a comment echoed by other students that I also spoke with. Fieldstone declined to comment. The kids are scared of other kids. The atmosphere is making their children anxious, paranoid, and insecure, closed off, even from their close friends. My son knew I was talking to you, and he begged me not to, said another Harvard Westlake mother. He wants us to. He wants to go to a great university, and he told me that one bad statement from a parent will ruin me. This is the United States of America? Are you kidding me? These people are starting to gather and stand up. I'm going to introduce you to a couple in San Francisco in a few minutes that are doing this, and they are changing the way things are done. Now, I don't necessarily, or they don't maybe necessarily agree with everything I say. They live in San Francisco, and they are liberal. However, they saw what the school board was standing for and spending all of their time on, and they were like, hey, how about math? What do you say? How about we do some work in school? How about you even open the doors of the school? And they started a little group. It grew to 400, and they've changed things. You are not alone. This is very concerning. And unless somebody starts to gather together and has the guts to do it, nothing's going to change, and it's going to get much, much worse.